All right, guys. So I want to apologize for the video mishap. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through the notes here just to explain everything. So what we're doing is we're going to use the unit circle to evaluate trig functions. Okay, and so to do that, I'm going to focus mainly if we think of just one angle. All right, so no matter what angle we have right here, there's some standard information that we're going to look for. Okay. Sorry about that. Josie just stepped on a Christmas song. So if we think of the triangles that we created when we were looking at the unit circle, we know the adjacent side to the angle is the x, right? Creates the x. The opposite side creates the y, and the hypotenuse is 1. So with that, if we think of this triangle, right, and the point on that circle being the coordinates, if we find sine of theta, we know sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse. So that gives us y over 1, which simplifies to just y. Cosine of theta is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, right, which is x over 1, which simplifies to x. Tangent is opposite over hypotenuse, which is y over x. All right, and so then we start to get into our inverse functions, cosecant, secant, and cotangent, right? Cosecant is 1 over sine, which because we know that sine is y, cosecant is 1 over y. Right, secant is 1 over cosine, okay, and so that's 1 over x. And tangent, or cotangent, is 1 over tangent of theta, right? Because tangent is y over x, this is 1 over y over x, which, to simplify, we multiply by the reciprocal, and we end up getting x over y. All right, so some helpful hints here as we go through, right? So if you notice this, notice that sine of theta is equal to y. So if you know the coordinate that belongs to a respective angle, the y value is what you get when you evaluate it for sine, right? The cosine is the x value, and the tangent is the y divided by the x, right? Or it's sine divided by cosine, okay? So if you can memorize, and eventually you probably will just because we'll do this enough, if you can memorize this first quadrant right here, right, then you're good for the rest of the unit circle. The only difference is the sign of the numbers, okay? And I'll point this out kind of as we go along here. All right, so in the first quadrant, all sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent are positive, okay? But if you look in the second quadrant, right, the x values are negative. So there's this saying that says all students take calculus, right? So in quadrant 1, all of them are positive. In quadrant 2, sine is the only one that's positive, right? Because the cosine is the x and it's negative. And tangent is y divided by x. And so it's a positive divided by a negative, so it'll be negative, right? So sine is the only one that's positive. In quadrant 3, right, tangent is the only one that's positive, right? Because you're dividing the y by the x, right? And so both sine and cosine individually are negative, but if you divide two negatives, you end up with a positive. And then all students take calculus, quadrant 4, x is positive, y is negative, right? So cosine is the only one that's positive. All right, so we're going to use that information to help us evaluate. So examples A, B, and C here, we're going to evaluate all 6 trig functions for pi over 6. All right, now pi over 6, this is the equivalent of 30 degrees. So if you think of the unit circle, and even if you need to construct a small one, at 30 degrees, we know the associated ordered pair is square root of 3 over 2, 1/2, right? So what that means is the sine is the y value, the cosine is the x value, and the tangent is the y divided by the x. Now, as nice as this is, we have to simplify this. So 1/2 divided by the square root of 3 over 2, we multiply by the reciprocal, okay? Those 2's cancel, and it gives me 1 over the square root of 3. We rationalize, right? And then we end up with the square root of 3 over 3, okay? Now, as I move on, cosecant of pi over 6 is 1 over the sine, so it's 1 over 1/2. We multiply by the reciprocal, and I end up with 2. Secant is 1 over cosine. So it's 1 over square root of 3 over 2. We multiply by the reciprocal. Okay. And so we end up getting 2 over square root of 3. I rationalize, and I get 2 square root of 3 over 3. Cotangent is 1 over the tangent, right? Which we are a couple different things that we can do on this one. We can either take the reciprocal, like 1 over the square root of 3 over 2, or you can do the x over the y, which is what I did here. So the square root of 3 over 2 divided by 1/2, right? Which is, we multiply by the reciprocal of the denominator, which is 2 over 1, and we end up just with the square root of 3 there. All right. Okay, so each of these different examples, I'm doing a different common angle or different reference angle. So 5 pi over 4, right? 5 pi over 4, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, anytime you have a denominator of 4, this is going to have a reference angle of pi over 4, all right? It's going to have a reference angle of pi over 4, which is the same as 45 degrees. So these ones are pretty easy because you know they're all going to be the square root of 2 over 2's. You just have to determine which quadrant that it's in, right? And so 5 pi over 4 is in quadrant 3. So if you think all students take calculus, they're all going to be negative except for cotangent and tangent, right? So sine is negative square root of 2 over 2. Cosine is negative square root of 2 over 2. Tangent, right? It's the negative square root of 2 over 2 divided by negative square root of 2 over 2, which is a positive 1, okay? Cosecant is 1 divided by negative square root of 2 over 2, which we multiply by the reciprocal, rationalize, and I end up with, this kind of got chopped off there. It's a negative square root of 2 over 2. Okay, secant is going to be the same thing as cosecant for that. And cotangent is 1 over tangent, which is 1 here. All right. So let's keep moving down here. All right. 0 degrees. All right. So this could be 0 degrees or 0 radians. Either way. All right. It's the same value. So right here at 0 degrees, we have the ordered pair 1, 0. So sine is 0, cosine is 1, tangent is 0 divided by 1, which is 0. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and you got to pay attention here because cosecant of 0, right, is 1 divided by the sine. Okay, so that's 1 divided by 0. Right? But you cannot divide by 0. So cosecant of 0 is undefined. And you can even try that. If you put that into the calculator, it'll give you an error, right? Secant is 1 divided by cosine. 1 divided by 1 is 1. Cotangent, 1 divided by 0 again, right? And so we get undefined for that value. All right. So the key here is knowing the coordinate pair that is associated with that angle. And then the sine is the y, cosine is the x, tangent is the y divided by x. All right, last one here. This one has a reference angle of pi over 3. Okay, it's the 5 pi over 3, and so that's going to be in quadrant 4. So quadrant 4, all students take calculus. Cosine and secant are the only one that's positive. So the ordered pair associated with this is 1/2 and negative square root of 3 over 2. So we have our sine, we have our cosine, we have our tangent. But this one we had to multiply by the reciprocal and simplify. We get the cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Thank you for putting those back. Thank you. All right. So now, not all the time are we going to get one of our common angles. So for instance, example 2, right, we're evaluating with a negative angle. So essentially what we need to do here is we need to figure out what the coterminal angle is for this, right? So if we think negative square root of 3 is right here, all right? So to find the coterminal, I'm going to add 2 pi, right, which is the same as 6 pi over 3, and I end up with 5 pi over 3, all right? So this is going to be the exact same thing as D up here, right? So all of the coordinates and everything, if you're evaluating for 5 pi over 3 and negative pi over 3, you're going to end up with the exact same values. All right. Last ones for example 3. These ones we're going to call periodic. We're going to use a period because 1 full revolution is what we call a period. And so 13 pi over 6 is not one of our normal angles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a coterminal by subtracting a full revolution. Right? So I subtract 2 pi and I end up with pi over 6. So sine of 13 pi over 6 and pi over 6 are going to give us the exact same values. and we get 1/2. Cosine 11 pi over 4, once again, I'm going to find a coterminal angle. I'm going to subtract 2 pi, all right, and I get 3 pi over 4. So 11 pi over 4 and 3 pi over 4 are coterminal, and they both have the same coordinates of negative square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2. So cosine is the x value, and that's where we get the negative. All right, and last one, tangent. Tangent is 7 pi over 2. Find a coterminal by subtracting 2 pi. All right, so we end up with 3 pi over 2. Well, 3 pi over 2 is one of our is one of the angles on the axes. All right, so we get the point 0, -1. All right, well, tangent is the y divided by x, so it's -1 divided by 0, and we get an undefined value here. Okay. All right, guys. So, like I said, I wanted to run through those so that way you have something to reference when you're looking at those videos. Okay. Let me know if you have any